Hey everybody, welcome to Inside Quest. We're the philosophical espresso shots for your intellect. Our goal is to bring on amazing people who can help you expand your mind. And if you're looking to play games with your brain, there's no better guest than the man joining us today. He is the human equivalent of psilocybin, a performance philosopher whose words weave worlds that punch through the banality of daily life like a bunker-busting missile. Frequently referred to as an ontological DJ, his mind blends ideas like a painter blends paint, transcending mere synthesis and entering the realm of true, unique creation. His smash hit web series Shots of Awe, which has received millions of views, is like watching an ideological artist creating a masterwork in real time. Disparate ideas are effortlessly brought together in joy and ecstasy, and the resulting wonderment is a future-bending tapestry so powerful, it's capable of changing you in 2 minutes or less, if you let it. His unparalleled ability to harvest wisdom and inspiration from the mist of ideas that envelops us all led the National Geographic Channel to tap him to host their monster success Brain Games, a show that he helped turn into Nat Geo's highest rated show of all time. His infectious enthusiasm and ability to teleport anyone into a state of epiphanous rapture has made him one of the most sought after speakers on the planet. This self-professed wonder junkie has lectured at TED Global, Google, Microsoft, IBM, and many more. He is a filmmaker, futurist, and philosopher who was recruited by former Vice President Al Gore for Current TV, where he wrote and produced more than 100 hours of original content, and by AOL, for whom he created the popular web series Future of Us. He is an artist in his prime, and his astonishing creations have been shared by everyone from Richard Branson to NASA. Please help me in welcoming the Emmy-nominated host watched in over 150 countries and in 45 languages. The man who's been called part Timothy Leary, part Ray Kurzweil, and part Neo from the Matrix. The alchemist of ideas, Jason Silva.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
What a pleasure to have you on the show, man.
Thank you, man.
I so wanted to do that, just like off the cuff in one of your shots of all.
Thank you.
I will crash and burn if I try it.
No, that was an amazing introduction. Hi, guys. How you guys doing? Thank you. That was so kind and amazing listening to you, introduce me like that.
Incredibly accurate. So as I was telling you before the camera started rolling, that gentleman in the back with the headphones on there introduced me to your videos 4 or 5 years ago. When we had just started the company, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's insane. Like, it was so infectious, the way that you're able to really capture the spirit of the idea.
Thank you.
As much as just articulate the idea. And there's something in my neuronal wiring that is so wired to hear your message and to really vibe with the way that you do it.
Amazing.
Just absolutely fucking cool, man. And
well, it takes one to know one, dude. So we're obviously in sync. Yeah.
Very
beautiful.
Kind. All right, so I'm completely obsessed with the brain.
Yes.
And as the host of Brain Games, which, by the way, when that was announced, I was over the moon. Because it was one of those things, I'm watching Shots of Awe, and I'm thinking, okay, this incredible web series was definitely getting the traffic that it deserved, but you didn't have that mainstream platform yet. So when you clicked over to that, I thought, these guys know what's up. It was not a surprise. But then that you've taken it to become the biggest show in Nat Geo's history, that's got to be pretty gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a perfect storm. I used to host a show on Al Gore's boutique TV channel, Current, and that was like my first gig out of college. So I spent 4 years getting my feet wet on that channel, and they never quite broke through to the mainstream. And so when I left Current is when I was like, I want to make digital content, and I want to make these like philosophical espresso shots, these kind of 3-minute epiphany bombs about things I was geeking out about. And it was really a way of immortalizing fleeting moments of inspiration, right? Because inspiration, like rhapsodic inspiration, is kind of defined by its transience. And I'm one of those people that, like, in the midst of ecstasy, I'm sort of haunted by its impermanence. I'm like acutely aware that this moment will pass. And for that reason, I've been obsessed with the video camera since I was a little kid. I've been obsessed with capturing the moment. And finally, when I left Current, it was like, okay, now I want to like focus on this, and I started self-funding the videos. And I had done maybe like 3 or 4 of them. I was posting them mostly on Vimeo at the time. And they started to get a little bit of sort of attention. They started to kind of spread, a lot of tweets, and caught the attention of Nat Geo. They were kind of spread around within the network, and then they were like, let's bring this guy to do Brain Games. So it's like both things kind of blew up at once, because then we were nominated for an Emmy. We premiered to the highest new episode, new show rating in the Nat Geo's history. And then at the same time, I partnered with Revision 3 in San Francisco, who were then bought by DDN, to keep making my videos. They were like, so then I was like, okay, so now the Shots of Awe can be a thing, Brain Games can be a thing, and I had like both platforms, right? The mainstream and the digital. And since then, they've just kind of both, you know, it was a perfect storm, like I said.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
My wife and I are total geeks for Brain Games.
Awesome.
Really, really interesting show. And the thing that really changed my life, honestly, was when I realized that I'm being controlled entirely by my brain. I only say to an extent in that I have some ability to influence it. But once I realized that, I realized if I'm actually going to take control of my life, the first thing I have to take control of is my brain, and to take control of it, I have to understand it. And the way that you guys go about in the show of really showing, but like really showing, right? So doing these games where it's like, hey, audience, you at home, right?
Right.
I want you guys to participate along, do this, do that. And then you feel the effect as you're sitting there. There's just so many things you've covered, so many things you learned, but you broke it down and said the thing that I find most fascinating is that I am being in a reality that's created by myself and my brain and the interaction therein. How intentional are you about the way that you construct this reality? If it is, you know, constructed by the brain.
Yeah, well, I think that that's one of the kind of empowering takeaways, you know, because part of what we keep coming back to on the show is that we receive all kinds of signals, all kinds of information through our senses. And then the brain, that information is somewhat incomplete at the same time. And so what our brain does is it fills in the blank. It sort of renders and completes the pattern. It makes estimations and inferences about the world, right? At any given moment, those signals are being interpreted, and then we're kind of like making conclusions and assessments about reality. So what that means is that we bring to our experience our own stereotypes and expectations, and we color the world with our own interpretation. And so it's this notion that our experience of the world is kind of a dance, or kind of like a collaboration between what's coming in and what we're bringing to the table. And so what that tells us is, no, we don't have a direct experience of reality. We don't have an empirical experience of reality. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And so through those games, you know, people feel tricked, people feel fooled on the show, and they're like, well, I don't have a direct experience of reality. What am I going to do? Am I having an ontological panic? You know, but then I think what's interesting is that it means, well, if so much of our experience is what we bring to our experience, a lot of the times subconsciously, well, how about bringing that up into consciousness, into our conscious awareness, and then see, well, my own intentionality, my own cognitive framing of whatever happens to me can color my world. So I become a co-author, I become the playwright of my own experience. You know, it starts to sound bumper stickerish, but it's really true. And the fact that there's kind of a neurological basis for this idea that you really do get to co-author your world, then it's like, well, all of a sudden your creative and linguistic choices govern your fate. You know, I design, therefore I become, and that's kind of what gets me excited about the show. More than the games themselves, which are really entertaining, it's the profound takeaway that, like, wow, the world is yours to create. You know?
Yeah, it's such a powerful lesson, and it's something that I really hope people that are trying to make something of their lives, like, you understand, and more importantly, that they believe in what that means. Because if you really can co-author, then you can go in, and it's like lucid dreaming, right? So the notion of lucid dreaming is that, hey, once you realize that you are dreaming, if you can stay asleep and in the dream, and at the same time have the awareness that the dream is completely made up in your own mind, now you can fly if you want, you can tell yourself a story that have dragons and wizards, like whatever you want, right? There's no longer any limitation whatsoever.
Right.
And the joy of lucid dreaming is so fucking incredible.
Right.
And for the limited times that I've been able to pull off even a hint of that, you're like, this is amazing, right? But then you wake up and realize the real world is almost exactly like that. And look, there are things we have to deal with. You know, it takes time currently to think of something and then manifest it in the real world. But the day my life changed forever was the day that I woke up and realized there's enough pieces of this that I can change, that I can create anything. And Quest, in many ways, is my lucid dream, right? I went from an employee, not feeling like I had any control of my life. And the reason these guys kind of chuckle when I said that you've been called part Neo in the Matrix is I'm really, really obsessed with that as an allegory for the human experience, right? That we can, that we are, first of all, enveloped in something that is a creation. that you can agree to the rules or disagree, and then as you start to realize what you can bend and break, that you change everything. And it doesn't have to be some crazy grand, like I'm gonna learn how to fly and jump off buildings. It doesn't have to be like that. But once you realize you don't have to accept who you are today, that you can push and change and grow into the person that you want to be. You can change anything in your life, right?
Yeah.
And
you hear echoes of this from a lot of great leaders. I mean, Steve Jobs used to talk about the reality distortion field, or rather, that used to be brought up when talking about his capacity to kind of bend people's minds to see the world through the lens that he brought to that, which is a beautiful idea, right? That you can distort reality. Ray Kurzweil, my favorite futurist in The Singularity is Near, says our ability to create virtual models in our heads, which is essentially virtual reality, right? The capacity to imagineer, combined with our modest-looking thumbs, was sufficient to usher in a secondary force of evolution called technology, and it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. I mean, Marshall McLuhan used to say we build the tools and the tools build us. So we've basically created ourselves, right? We come up with these ideas, we actualize these ideas, we interact with the physical manifestation of these ideas, and then those ideas change us further. And that self-reinforcing feedback loop is the story of man. There's a great book called Cooking Made Us Human. We discovered and harnessed fire, and we could cook our food, and we started using stone tools, and over a couple generations our jaws physically shrank, our teeth physically shrank. So it's a physiological relationship between us and the things we make. So we really are a self-creating species. And you can look at it, the long view, deep time version of that, but then you can bring it back into your own individual life. How will I warp my world according to my will? How will, what's the definition of magic? As I imagine, so it becomes, and this is what we can do. I mean, look, you're here manifesting this right now. This is going to be digitally sent out into the world, sending ripples down into people's consciousnesses and maybe change their thinking, and who knows the feedback loops that might transpire therein. So I think it's a really wonderful thought. We just have to be able to remind ourselves that on a daily basis, because we tend to forget.
We do. And you quote Buckminster Fuller saying, "Dare to be naive." And I think that's a really powerful quote. What do you mean by that, or what did he mean by that you take to be important?
I love Buckminster Fuller. He was a brilliant engineer that seemed to believe that we could come up with a solution to any problem, and I think he alluded to certain things like the idea that scarcity is contextual, which is also echoed by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. And technology is a resource liberating mechanism. So something is only scarce until you create a technology that turns it into something abundant. And so I think dare to be naive is, dare to be willing to question everything you thought you knew. Dare to dissolve your own dogmas. Dare to be challenged. Dare to see the world differently today than you saw it yesterday. Michael Pollan says, transcend the been there's and done that's of the adult mind with their nodding resignations, see the world through the eyes of a child, be willing to be astonished.
Yeah, it really struck me, and I'm reading a book right now called Originals, and it's talking about, it talks about what makes an original, but one of the most interesting things that he talks about is how someone who started original can calcify. And even Einstein said, my greatest curse was that I rejected authority so aggressively I became an authority myself, right? So, and to see how people calcify into dogma, which is one of my biggest fears. Like I'm so convinced that looking at the world this way, the way that you look at it, to approach everything with the heart of an artist, which is something I want to get back to, because I think you do uniquely in the human race. It's so fucking incredible to watch. But to take in the wonder and the joy and the ideas, but to take them in like a painter would take paint, right? And say, okay, now what do I do with this, right? And that to me, when you don't let yourself calcify, when you have the naivete of the beginner, when you actively cultivate that, like you seek out the areas in which you are ignorant, and not ignorant that it's bad or that you can't accomplish something, but that you welcome that ignorance, you embrace it, you love it, you seek it, you're always looking for where are the edges so that I can spill into the ignorance, so I can not be held back by the things that I think I know, right? And then really give birth to something new because you didn't know any better. Like that to me is crazy.
Yeah, well, there's one of my favorite experiences. I was once told that I was a cognitive ecstasy addict. So that I was like addicted to the moment when the dots connect, the moment of like ecstatic revelation, revelatory ecstasy. It's like when you finally feel a profound sense of understanding something new. And there's an exhilaration that's attached to that cognitive ecstasy. Usually it's a moment of just awe, right? And then there was all this science that was published about this mysterious emotion that accompanies these mindgasms known as awe. And they describe awe as an experience of such perceptual vastness, such perceptual expansion, that you have to upgrade or reconfigure your maps of the world to assimilate that experience. So that's like decalcifying, because as you grow into the world and the world grows into you, you start to create these maps of the world, these schematics for how things work. But that every time you experience profound awe, profound transformation, something that just decenters you, that smashes your ego, it dwindles the broadcast of the ego so you can tune into the broadcast of the whole orbital effect, overview position, cosmic perspective, psychedelic ecstasy, whatever it may be. When that happens and you are decentered, you all of a sudden get to make new maps for new realities. And that's like the reset button, that I think is the antidote to the calcification. And so for me, I'm always seeking out experiences that will provide that kind of electric exhilaration and decentering and catharsis so that I may be reborn anew,
So we all tell ourselves a story about ourselves. We have words that we use to describe ourselves. Do you internally use the word artist?
Yeah, very much so, especially because I talk a lot about technology. But you can't just start with that. You got to start with some kind of data-driven case, that allows you to extrapolate where we're going, and that's where things like Moore's law, things like exponential technological growth, that Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler have written about in abundance. Those are data-driven facts. The fact that the supercomputer in our pocket today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be half a building in size and $60 million 40 years ago is an example of exponential technological progress. So you kind of start with Moore's law, but then you go into waxing rhapsodic about what this implies, because once you understand the exponential function, you can dream bigger than we've ever dreamed before. And so I sort of start with that technical, data-driven fact for about 10 minutes, and then I switch into artist mode. But whenever asked, what I would call what I do, I would say an artist, because I don't want to be scrutinized like an academic. I'm not an academic by training. I studied philosophy and film. So I'm an artist who's interested in technology. I'm an artist who's interested in the future of humanity. I like to think and I like to make content about the things I think about. But I like the poetic license of the artist. I like that the artist is allowed to interpret and opine and is not stuck to sort of too much empiricism. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge believer in physical time together, sharing the same space. And as the digital world has grown more powerful, it's easier to still have something meaningful with somebody at a great distance. But I've picked up on something in being next to you that I haven't in hours and hours and hours of watching your videos and reading the things you've written and all that. In sitting here, I'm realizing now with you using the self-narrative of being the artist that you're taking in this new information and you're creating something wholly unique. And it's that I have for so long migrated away from my own self-identification as an artist because I didn't feel that it served me. I felt that it moved me backwards in terms of being taken seriously as a business runner. So right now, right here, it's like I'm really realizing that there's tremendous power in having that be part of the self-narrative, in as much as you're trying to create something new from these things that you find. And as these ideas come at you, they are things that are very much meant to be real and tangible and objects of creation. So thank you, man. That's really honestly, that's incredible.
Thanks, man. I mean, I always think it's about kind of bridging back, what's happening, the radical changes that we're facing in the world, the technological disruptions that we're witnessing day to day, and kind of bridge that back to what does it mean to our unique human situation? How does that impact what it means to be human today? Marshall McLuhan, another one of my heroes, I keep mentioning him, he used to say it's always been the artist who realizes that the future is the present and uses his work to prepare the grounds for it. The artist has a unique outsider perspective. He's not like stuck up this close to the changes that we're seeing, but he's connecting the dots. He's seeing these trends and these trends and these trends and these trends and finding echoes and overlaps and the pattern that connects. Isaiah Berlin said to understand is to perceive patterns. I love that notion because it kind of allows me to go, aha, this is interesting and this is why it's interesting. If I'm epiphanized, all I want to do is epiphanize you in return. I'll give you an example. So I was at the TED conference last week in Vancouver, and there was a lot of fascinating presentations. There was one particular researcher, his first name was Yuri, but he was talking about the magic of communication, right? So when we communicate with somebody, particularly somebody that really seems to get us, and we feel like they understand us, we're finishing each other's sentences, we feel like there's some kind of mind merger happening. So he's finally found some empirical data to back up this phenomenon of communication. He calls it brain coupling. So he did fMRI scans on the brains of people when they were communicating, especially when they had really good chemistry. What does that mean? He found that their brain patterns actually start mirroring each other.
Wow.
So what does this tell us? That our brain, through the act of communication, can actually sync up with another brain and start mirroring the patterns of another brain wirelessly. So the whole metaphor of our brains functioning potentially like antennas, being able to tune into each other, now has some kind of empirical backing and legitimacy, so that it takes the metaphor and makes it real, so that our intuition is backed up by data, so that when we feel that intersubjective coherence, then it's holy shit, our brains are dancing, we are one, we are merging. That language is a technology, so that technologically mediated telepathy, when mind and mind are communicating, is a singular process. Communication is a singular process, encompassing two or more brains. So, and I was like, this is amazing, because it just all of a sudden, it gives you a new lens and a new way to validate and understand something that intuitively we've known forever.
Yeah, that to me is incredible. I love the way you talk about communication as a technology, right? One of the earliest technologies, the alphabet as a technology.
1000%.
And when you start thinking about that, man, it really makes this feel like we've been looking for so long for evidence of telepathy. Here it is,
exactly.
Right? It's you say it out wirelessly, it reverberates through the air and gets to the other person, and suddenly you can see the images in their mind. That's fucking crazy.
1000%.
The one thing that you do, I think, incredibly well, and I think that people would do well to take from you, is here you have somebody who's incredibly intelligent, articulate, and yet fills himself with this childlike wonder, and at his best is sort of this unguarded optimist who is naked in your enthusiasm for the world. And I don't know, man, that's really a special thing to me, and to be able to have that experience in your life and to get where I've gotten in business. Most people, I think, they have to harden up, and I did, for sure I had to harden up, but I never wanted to lose that. I never wanted to lose the ability to be beautiful and to acknowledge beauty and wonder, and to be able to stand in rapture. You talk really coolly about planes, right? We go on these planes and we're riding over clouds and please.
Yeah, no, it's a miracle, right? It's an example of hedonic adaptation, how quickly something becomes taken for granted. I mean, one of my favorite philosophers, Alain de Botton, he's out of the UK. He wrote this book called The Art of Travel, and there's a beautiful meditation in there about the magic of airplanes and the magic of aviation. That few of us would stand up on a plane and scream with requisite emphasis, "We are flying over a cloud!" Something that would have detained, Da Vinci or Michelangelo or anybody, 100 years ago. They would have stopped in their tracks. They would have said, "We are as gods," and we're busy watching the on-flight movie and closing the blinds. And so I think for me, optimism, though, is definitely an antidote, right? It's my way of raging against the darkness, living in a space of possibility, living in a space of pronoia as an antidote to paranoia, right? So paranoia is a lens to see the world, I connect the dots and everything's going to shit, Pronoia is I connect the dots and I think that everything could go better than it's been going before, that things might get better, that we can overcome, that we shall overcome. So it is a choice you make. There's a lot of data out there that points to all the ways in which the world is getting better, contrary to what you see in the news. You look at the work of Steven Pinker, his TED Talk, The Myth of Violence. The world has never been less violent than it is now. The chances of a man dying at the hands of another man today are the lowest than they've ever been in all of human history. The work of Hans Rosling, another academic who's done these beautiful animations online. Every country in the world, by every measurable indicator, the rise. He's shown the rise in quality of life. That's not to say that there's no problems, but that's to say that when you look a little deeper, you find all these trends that give you hope. That doesn't sell, that doesn't fire up the amygdala. If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. And so, again, optimism is a choice. But I certainly deal with anxiety and cynicism, as an ongoing struggle. I mean, just being mortal is an ongoing struggle. Contemplating, the fact that we've committed no crime, yet we've all been dealt a death sentence is kind of horrific. One of my favorite books by Ernest Becker is called The Denial of Death. And he basically says, we are in a quite unique position as a human species. With our minds, we can ponder the infinite. We can contemplate infinity. We're seemingly capable of anything, yet we're simultaneously housed in heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying bodies. So we're both gods and worms, And so how do we respond to the human situation, to the potential horror of this situation? Well, we rage against the darkness with art, with poetry, with love, with science, with engineering. We build beautiful fucking cathedrals, and we make rockets that go into orbit, and we make films that allow us to enter the subjective world of someone else. We expand and transcend and overcome. That's like what we do. But if we don't, it's very easy to succumb to the darkness. You know what I mean? Like, I get a little headache and I'm like, oh God, I need to see a doctor. What if something's wrong? Like, the dread can seep in at any moment, and we have to keep it at bay. At least I do.
Now, and I love the way that you keep it at bay, right? So many people succumb to whatever their neutral is, right? So when I'm in my neutral state, I'm going dark, or no, I find my bliss, or whatever. It's actually more interesting to me that that's not necessarily your neutral, but that you found this tool that you use to pull yourself out. And one thing that drives me crazy, and these guys have heard me rail about it, and anybody that watches the show, excuses drive me nuts. Like, they drive me up a wall. And the reason they drive me up a wall is because I have a long-standing history with them. I used to make excuses about everything. There was a reason why my life wasn't going the way that I wanted it to, and like things were holding me back. It was all out of my control, of course.
Sure.
And the thing that changed my life was one day I said, I'm going to take responsibility for everything in my life, no matter how absurd, no matter how many people would tell me that's completely unrelated to me, that there was nothing I could do. In fact, just the other night while traveling on the amazing trip, we were in an Uber, and the Uber driver wasn't paying attention, going full throttle at the car in front of us. Everyone starts, whoa, 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 whoa. He looks, sees it, hits the brakes. We stop as we all breathe a sigh of relief. Pow, from behind, right? And I'm like, I let us get rear-ended. And that's how I own my life. Like, what could I have done to stop us from being rear-ended? And the reason I give examples like that is because if I'm focused on how I can take an action there, I'm focused on taking an action everywhere. I'm feeling dark and whatever, I'm gonna find some way to tap into beauty, some way to take control of my brain, whatever the case may be. But why do you do it? Like, I know why I do it. Why do you do it? Why do you rage against the dying of the light emotionally? We'll talk emotional first.
Yeah, I think because I have probed the dark side. Like, I have a real soft spot for melancholy. I've done a lot of videos about love that celebrate how exquisite it is to be enamored, to experience consummation with another, to stare into the iris of a lover's eye. But I've also explored the dread, the haunting paralysis of realizing that all is temporary, right? So even our greatest ecstasies are tinged by a bit of darkness. This moment will pass, this moment will end. And I studied film because I've always loved movies. Cinema allows us to share subjectivity, to feel connected to somebody else who's also experienced what we have felt. And that's kind of amazing because we feel less alone in that moment. And I think my own desire to make media about this stuff is about, at least if I can explain to you how I have felt when I have probed and contemplated loss, it makes the sadness less acute because at least we're in it together. At least I can communicate what something felt like. Also, making media about these sensations allows me to go beside myself and aestheticize a human experience. And once I've turned an experience into an aesthetic work, at least the aesthetic work is not fleeting. Right. So I may have lost her, I may have lost this moment, but now I have this piece of content that I can always go back to remind me of the intensity of that. So that is like an example of raging against the darkness, of saying, I will not just like forget this. I will not forget you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
You've said before, I felt this and it matters. Mm-hmm. That really resonates with me. I often wonder why I work so hard on this show. Like, it's a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. And I really do want to help people. But if I'm honest, I've yet to come up with a satisfying answer outside of neurochemistry as to why. And maybe it is just neurochemistry, and that is entirely possible, by the way. Mm-hmm. I am just wired to enjoy seeing somebody else get something great. And by the way, I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's just how I'm wired. Like, there's real joy, like biochemical joy for me in saying, hey, here's this thing that I learned and it really impacted my life, here you go. And then 1 out of 1,000 maybe actually does something transformative with it. But man, when that one person does something and you stand back and go, holy hell, like, look, they've taken that thing, and it is meaningful that I helped them encounter that idea.
You know, it's like that famous quote that says you can live as if nothing is a miracle, or you can live as if everything is a miracle. And if reality is coupled to perception, then if you can tweak the knobs and levers of perception, you can tweak reality. So having some kind of authorship over your own phenomenology, some kind of authorship over your own subjectivity is the ultimate antidote to despair. Like, even if I'm hypnotizing myself with some kind of bullshit script, if it works for me and it makes me happy, then that's great. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, one of the reasons I love Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler so much and their Flow Genome project is because these guys are deconstructing ecstatic states of being, rhapsodic states of being. These guys are figuring out the technology, the psychology, the neurobiology, and the pharmacology of ecstatic states in which we go beyond ourselves, outside ourselves, states of grace. And these guys are saying these are not haphazard phenomenon, these are not temporary moments that we can't control, but no, we can become ontological DJs of our reality. The knobs and levers of perception are the answer to sort of deifying our own experience. The control freak in me loves that. I want us to be able to like engineer our own nirvana. Kind of like David Pearce's hedonistic imperative. I don't know if you've ever read this amazing digital essay online. It's called the hedonistic imperative, that we have an imperative as a society to use biotechnology, nanotechnology, pharmacology to create gradients of bliss for ourselves that are above and beyond anything we've ever experienced. That we are a human dynamic unfolding art project, and that we should just like up the signal to noise ratio and just, you know, stage beautiful ecstasies for one another.
Now, did you say he says that we have a biological imperative?
No, that we have a moral imperative.
Moral imperative.
Yeah.
Why a moral imperative? If you had said biological, I'd be right with you.
He just thinks the fact that we have consciousness and we still accept suffering is a crime.
Interesting. What do you think, going to biological imperative, what do you think drives humans at an evolutionary level? Like, what, before we could conceptualize deities and try to conquer our mortality by, you know, dreaming of salvation, what drove us to that point? Why were we always moving? What's kept us always reaching for something out of our grasp?
Well, biologically, obviously, we're programmed to reproduce and perpetuate ourselves, but once we got caught in self-awareness, you know, Kevin Kelly in his book, What Technology Wants, says that the origin of language was the first singularity. Language, it's like a magic mirror that reveals to the mind what the mind thinks. And so through language, we got caught in some kind of self-consciousness and self-awareness. And then networks and webs of meaning started to be the space in which we live. We started to live inside of these symbolic realities. And so then the things we care about changed. It was about more than just reproducing ourselves. It was about anchoring our lives in meaning. It was about living within a narrative. And that's where, you know, Joseph Campbell's ideas become so important. You know, like, we are all a hero on a journey, and we must overcome, and we must transcend, and we must learn, and we must make the return to tell the tale. Like, it just, once we came up with these like meta patterns that impregnate our existence with this thing called meaning and purpose, that like changed the game forever. On the one hand, probably responsible for our radical progress, that Cambrian explosion of mind that we represented. On the other hand, it's the reason that we suffer existential dread at the same time. So I guess it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell's ideas are incredibly
I
powerful.
love him.
Reading The Power of Myth completely changed me. I mean, that book, Quake book of all Quake books for me, read it when my wife and I first started dating. And you know, he's going through and he's saying one of the biggest problems I think that we face as a society is there's no longer a coming of age ritual. And he was like, when you turned 13, they took you out into the woods and they kicked your teeth in. He was like, all of a sudden you knew from one moment to the next that you were a different human being.
Sure.
And he goes on to talk about divorce rate and how there's no real sense of meaningful transition from being single to being married. And that's part of why he was saying that we have such high divorce rates. And so here I am contemplating marrying this woman and what is going to be my response to that, and how can I be different on the day before and the day after my marriage. And so I literally went through a ritualistic scarification as a part of my wedding, which is absolutely incredible, and it put me in the right mental space to say I'm a different human being before this and after. And I don't even need people to agree or disagree that one should ritualistically scar themselves to make their marriage better. That's fine, but to me, it's about availing yourself of all the mental tools in order to construct, right, the reality that you want. And in reading that, I saw, like, here's somebody who's giving me a key to the kingdom. Here's somebody who's solving a mystery for me. They're saying, look, I've gone to the mountaintop and this is what I've seen. There's a lack of ritual. There's all these powerful myths. They've somehow fallen away in modern society, and we're no longer forcing ourselves through a moment of acknowledged transformation. And to have some Jesus, you have one when you graduate from high school, right? You put on a cap and gown and you walk, it's at least something, but there's nothing other than standing in a church. If that's the way you go, you could even do it more low-key than that, you know, and saying a couple vows and then you're done. And I was just like, that made a lot of sense to me. That to me is cultivation, right? To cultivate a mindset, to really grab the bull by the horns and make changes. What do you cultivate in your own mind, and what do you think people should be cultivating in theirs to have the kind of rapturous life that they all want to have?
Yeah, I mean, I'm big. I try to cultivate radical novelty in my life. I find that real novel experiences, easily triggered by things like international travel, are probably some of the most useful experiences you can have, because they remind you that the reality in which you live is just a series of codes and symbols, right? Like, all realities are virtual. All virtualities are real. The dream is real when you're in it. So American society, living in California, like, that is an ontological tunnel. That's a reality tunnel. You know, go to the Netherlands, where the whole country rides bicycles up and down. Just go to other places and see how other people live, and the most mundane and ordinary things that you take for granted become extraordinary and wonderful. It's like looking at the world through a microscope. So I try to cultivate experiences of radical novelty because they take me outside of myself, because they make the world interesting again. And also because I find that a lot of times, you know, when we kind of get in our heads and succumb to the banalities of everydayness, it's simply a consequence of hedonic adaptation. You become blind to what's always around, you know?
Are you always just seeking something new, or do you actually do hedonic reset points?
I try to seek the new in the hopes that the answer will lie, you know, just behind that tree, or just over there in that city or that town. I don't know. It allows me to be more present. When I'm in novel experiences, my brain is not so good at expectations, at making predictions. Again, back to brain games and finding patterns and filling in the blanks. When it's all new around me, I'm less likely to fill in the blanks. So I'm kind of like at the edge, not knowing what's coming next, and that makes you really present.
Now, as somebody who's self-identified somewhat introverted, when you go to a new place, how do you make sure that you're sort of in the thick of it?
The cool thing is Shots of Awe has really had a global impact, which is kind of amazing. Everywhere I go, I meet friends who love the content. And the cool thing about Shots of Awe is, like, you know, McKenna used to say, find the others. Like, if you dig the videos I make, I think it says something about you. It certainly says that we're on the same frequency, that you're kind of thinking of it on a certain level. And I have never met a Shots of Awe fan of my videos that hasn't immediately delighted me with their conversation or their passion or their presence. And I tend to be more open to meeting strangers outside of the US, only because, you know, if I'm in LA, if I'm in San Francisco, I kind of already have a group of friends. I'm kind of usually busy. But if I'm hanging out in Amsterdam and I get an email from somebody, it's like, hey, I saw on Instagram that you're here. I love Shots of Awe. I'd love to meet up for a coffee. I'm much more likely to say yes, and much more likely for that person to actually become a friend. And that's really fun. When I say that I'm an introvert, I just mean that I have a finite bandwidth with which I want to be around people, and then I just need to go reset and be alone. I recharge, I get my energy back during, like, quiet time. Right. I love people, I just don't get energy from people.
Gotcha.
I spend energy with people.
Yeah. No, I'm exactly the same. How do you organize all the information in your brain, dude? Your ability to pull quotes and verbatim, hey, dude, I might add, like,
you have a very good ability yourself. I would ask you the same thing. Like, when something is important and speaks to me, it needs to be permanently part of my, like, virtual library. It just needs to be around so I can pull from it in conversation as needed. And I keep all that stuff mostly electronically. But there's a remarkable consistency, and I think it's a mix of being an associational thinker, you know, very much like an artist, like all over the place, like connecting the dots, but also extremely disciplined control freak. My mother is mostly just artist, and then my dad is mostly just like control. You know, and I have a bit of both, which I think is a strength. It allows me to just be really good at executing, be really good at, like, not losing the quote that I came across that I loved. You know, I don't lose things. That's like, and so, yeah, I think it's a balance. And then just trusting that getting enough rest, taking care of yourself, taking care of the body, mind, will make sure that you're operating on the level that you need to operate within to do what you do in the world.
Yeah. How do you get the information? Do you read? Do you watch videos?
Yeah, so there's this, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term the Commonplace Book.
No.
So Stephen Johnson, I'm going to read you this quote. Stephen Johnson, who wrote the book Where Good Ideas Come From, A Natural History of Innovation. So he basically, it's a book about creativity, right? So he's talking about how the intellectual British gentlemen, the men of learning back in the day, how they used to keep these special journals, these commonplace books. And so here's the great quote. So this is how I read and archive and my process. The historian Robert Darnton describes this tangled mix of writing and reading. Unlike modern readers who follow the flow of a narrative from beginning to end, early modern Englishmen read in fits and starts and jumped from book to book. They broke texts into fragments and assembled them into new patterns by transcribing them in different sections of their notebooks. Then they reread the copies and rearranged the patterns while reading more excerpts. Reading and writing were therefore inseparable activities. They belonged to a continuous effort to make sense of things, for the world was full of signs and you could read your way through it. And by keeping an account of your readings, you made a book of your own, one stamped with your personality.
Wow.
So when I saw that, I was like, that actually makes sense, because that's kind of what I do. Right. So whether it's my Kindle or all my books, they're all like half marked, half of the pages are folded. I'll read a chapter from one and then put it down, I'll open another one, I'll read another chapter, then I'll find a connection between the two things. Maybe I'll transcribe a paragraph. That's like how my process works.
Wow, it's really powerful seeing the results of those connections. And you've talked about how we all have a certain Umwelt, we'll call it, of ideas that are sort of easily accessed. And one of the things that, whether it's nootropics or other ways to stimulate one's mind, that the most powerful thing is things that cast that wider net, right?
Totally.
That's pretty interesting. Talk to us about the connections and why that's so powerful.
Yeah, so the associational thinking, which is like the hallmark of creativity, is to find connections between things. Creativity is just connecting things. And I think this is referred to as like semantic priming. So if I say the word bird, there's these immediate like ripple associations that you immediately make. Like when you think of a bird, some of the connected threads might be wings and then flight, right? Those are immediate semantic connections. Certain states of consciousness are ones in which you achieve or you enter into a state of hyperpriming, where you cast a wider associative net. Now, too much of that falls then into patternicity. That's like when you're crazy and you're making connections between things that are completely unrelated. But if you can kind of walk that line and maintain that tension, right? Cast a wide net, but still make sure you bring it back, right? And keep it coherent, a rational enunciation of meanings, then you're good. And I think that's what creativity is all about.
Yeah, and using creativity, knowing how powerful it can be, finding ways for people to link these ideas to increase their creativity. I think a lot of people feel trapped by a lack of original ideas. And the thing that I just cannot impress upon people enough is don't worry about the original ideas, right? Make unique connections. And it's when you start making unique connections, that's really you, right? And there's, like, when you stop and think about who am I, what defines me, it really isn't original ideas that you have. It really is connections between two things that somebody else wouldn't make. And when you think of your own personality as a snowflake, which for me at least is kind of a cool way to think of it, that never before or again will somebody be exactly like me.
Beautiful.
And make the exact connections that I would make, like that's when you begin to trust those weird connections, the things that are strange about you, and you realize that it's actually those points of non-conformity that make you powerful because you're no longer predictable. And going back to brain games, it's like the mind is such a prediction engine, right? That's what it's doing. It's why you don't trip all the time, because you're able to predict where the footfalls are going to fall. Your whole life have walked with staircases a certain distance apart, and it's only when one isn't that distance that you realize, oh Jesus, I was actually predicting a certain distance, it didn't happen, and now that's broken, and it's very disjointing. So understanding that shutting down people's ability to predict your behavior makes you way more interesting, not less interesting. And I know people feel like there's a real vulnerability to being beyond the prediction, but honestly, like look at the people who've achieved the most in their lives. They're the people that farthest transcend, without getting crazy, they farthest transcend our ability to predict. And
1000%.
My partners and I, we used to say, like, we zig when other people zag. Like, that's exactly why we've gotten where we've gotten, because we had to cross a bridge. Do we take outside money or not? Do we go public or not? We're like, we can't ever go public. The reason we can't ever go public is you will never understand in the moment why we're making the choice that we're making, because this company is a unique fingerprint of three people who trust their instinct, who trust those weird fucking connections that they make. But you, over time, you grow to trust those connections. I think they're powerful. I'm going to ask you to hit us with one last thing, and then I will let you go. What is the definition of a life well lived?
Wow. The definition of a life well lived. Well, here's the thing. So Kevin Kelly has talked about this idea that's been written about before called the finite game and the infinite game. So finite games are played to win or lose. Infinite games are played to keep the game going. And so for me, a life well lived is a life that is not about victories or losses, but about a continuous process of growth, a continuous process of evolution, a continuous process of adventure, curiosity, bewilderment, and awe. One in which you don't go quietly into that good night at the end of the race, but instead you rage and rage and rage against the dying of the light. As Alan Harrington said, we must never forget we are cosmic revolutionaries, not stooges conscripted to advance a natural order that kills everyone. Having invented the gods, we can turn into them.
That's awesome, Jason. Thank you so much, man, for coming on.
Bro.
That was incredible.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely fucking incredible.
Thank you, bro.
All right, guys, you know I don't bring people onto this show that I don't think are well worth diving into, because I'm going to spend my time researching them. I I am begging you, drop this man's name into any search engine on the planet, Jason Silva. You will be rewarded with a litany of some of the most amazing and infectious insights ever, delivered in a way that are designed to absolutely reach inside your brain and squeeze the neurochemistry until you yourself are enraptured with bliss. It is so beautiful and so fucking amazing. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that this man exists, that I came across him, and that he puts stuff out every week. You've got to be watching Shots of Awe. You've got to be watching him on National Geographic Channel, the Brain Game series. Absolutely incredible. This guy is the world's most unique snowflake, and the beauty is that he's trying to impact you. He's trying to create something that is real, that is substantial out of these moments of epiphany that he has, and give them to you so that they will live on in you, so that you will be able to share in it, so that you will have a mind that is linked with this man. And as somebody who's just done it, I can tell you it's fucking beautiful. Boys and girls, Jason Silva will take you to places you've never been. Jason, where can they find you?
Oh, please, thank you for that incredible, wow. Can I just give you a hug, man?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, please, guys, visit my my Facebook page. Just search Jason Silva on Facebook or facebook.com/Jason L. Silva. It has a little verified badge. You'll see it. And then hit like. You can keep up with all my videos there. That's really the fastest growing platform. I'm also on Instagram, Jason L. Silva. I'm on Twitter, Jason Silva. And of course, Brain Games on the National Geographic Channel. Finally on YouTube, Shots of Awe, youtube.com/Shots of Awe. But really, I recommend liking my Facebook page, because I'm doing a lot of Facebook Live, getting all my videos up there. That's really where it's about.
Awesome.
Thank you.
If you guys aren't already, you've got to be watching Brain Games, which airs on Sundays at 9 p.m., 8 Central on National Geographic Channel. It is absolutely amazing. It is full of incredibly useful and intriguing facts about the brain. And as somebody who knows that once you get control of the brain, you get control of your life, I really can't recommend the show highly enough. And as always, you guys can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Inside Quest on Twitter and Instagram. Go there, leave comments, subscribe, let us know what you guys are thinking. That community has become so amazing, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think. You've been so supportive of each other. It's absolutely incredible. So we will see you there on the socials. And until next week, my friends, be legendary.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.